Big thank you to the audience who are present physically and those of us who are joining us online. This session will cover two parts. One, the life of a very colorful person called Donald Anderson, who happened to be the son of a huge legend, Kenneth Anderson. We'll also cover part of the city, Bangalore, a time that has gone by, and one can't believe it. Just when I went through the book myself, I couldn't believe that this is the Bangalore that I live in at one point. But to begin with, as we mentioned that Donald Anderson was the last of the white hunter. The concept of shikar or hunting is not new. In fact, a lot of hunters almost became nature lovers. They talk about nature, etc., etc. Did that happen with this wonderful man called Donald Anderson?
Unfortunately, no, Tony. If that had happened, it would have made my book far easier to write and sell, because that's the route that most hunters approach. Right? You start with hunting, then as you grow older, you realize what it is to take lives, and then you give up that gun and become a staunch conservationist, like Corbett, for example, or even Donald's father, Kenneth Anderson. But Don never chose that. He thought he could hunt for all his life. It's only the 1972 Wildlife Act which kind of stopped it. But otherwise, Don did hunting for practically from the age of 13 onwards to, all the way to 1972.
It was a way of life back then.
It was a way of life back then, absolutely, with Donald Anderson. Regarding the book itself, when you write non-fiction, you can structure the way you want it, the narrative and everything. Right? But for non-fiction, all I had was Don's story, and my purpose was to tell it exactly the way he told me, right, without any filters and things like that. So, to answer your question, no, he did not become a conservationist at any point in time. He may have had remorse, but he never chose the path of conservation.
You're right. In case he did choose, we wouldn't have a book today because it is that colorful. Without being very apologetic about what he did, at the same time, he had his own eccentricity. We'll get there. Okay, when I began reading, and I realized that I've hit upon gold practically, because the mood is almost similar to what I wrote. I mean, mine was a fiction, yours obviously is non-fiction. This book may not be easy to publish. I mean, this is what I think. Am I right over there, or did you know who you're going after, who your readers would possibly, or you just think, you know what, I just need to finish something which I feel for, and let me just go ahead and write? What were your thoughts when you began this project?
So it's a mix of all those things, Tony. So and the genesis of this starts with, as I knew Don for 6 years, from 2008 to 14, and the years I knew him, he kind of gave me a fantastic collection of photographs and negatives, starting from the late 1800s to the modern day. And me, I'm a very lazy person. I said, you know what, I'll just take the photographs, make a book, and it'll sell. But I realized that wasn't the case. Nobody would be interested. And
you're talking about a coffee table book that you thought
correct.
about.
Yeah, the easy way out.
Typical, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, just put photographs and it get it didn't work out, obviously. Then I met a couple of people along the way who kind of advised me that the photographs can be a part of the book, but you have to tell the story of Donald Anderson, and that's what will sell.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, the story had to be without filters, and there's a lot of bravado in the way Don lived his life. So I wanted that to come across. So if I was writing something like that, the title kind of gave it away, saying it would be the story of a hunter. And with that, all doors kind of closed. So every publisher I would reach out to would say, you know what, great story, but you know what, we don't want to be associated with hunting, because you know there are so many armchair people or activists who are ready to pounce on you. They would not look beyond the title of the book or the story, but they would just see it as me glorifying hunting today, which absolutely isn't. The book isn't anything like that. So the title and the story made it very, very difficult for me to find publishers. And to actually get somebody to, look at the contents beyond the first chapter or so, the planets have to align. He or she would have to have woken up on the right side of bed. India probably had to won the cricket match the previous day. Everything had to align, right?
Right.
And then you have a minute's notice to make your story, right? Make it interesting. See, I had no misgivings of what this book was about. It's not a Nobel Prize winner. So whenever I approached a publisher, it was always a left and a right brain exercise. So the right brain would focus on the writing and the story and things like that.
Are you an MBA, by the way? Let's continue.
So the left side was actually building an audience for this book. So when I approached a publisher, I would say, listen, if you take care of the publishing, I'll take care of the selling. I will have an audience primed and ready for this book when it comes out. So, and the book took me 6 years because lots of issues, Don's health and all those things. So when the book was ready, I already had an audience ready, at least for the first print run.
Right.
So despite all that, it was very difficult to sell, but here we are today.
You're a publisher's dream come true. In fact, if authors who are out there, if you can just do that one bit to say that, listen, you do the printing part of it. Of course, after you believe in my work,
Right.
I will also be with you. I think that's what a new age publisher looks at also.
Correct.
An author who just doesn't write, but also helps in getting that audience going.
Right.
But having said that, who would that audience, at least did you have an audience in mind that this is the kind of person who would read my book?
Not initially.
So you wrote for yourself?
I wrote for myself. One is pride because I grew up reading Cobbett and Kenneth Anderson.
Right.
So if I could write the last chapter in Kenneth Anderson's life, which probably most people don't know about, written from obviously his son's perspective,
Okay.
there was pride. But as I started putting it all together and piecing it together, I realized there were so many audiences that could cater to. And if you draw, I don't want to sound very mathematical, but if you draw a Venn diagram of multiple sets, the intersection point is this book. And what those sets would be historians, those who want to know what life was like in Bangalore, or even in India in the 1930s and 40s. For people of Bangalore to know what their city was like. For conservationists and those who like the outdoors, the loss that we have in our wildlife and our forests, right? How did that happen? It didn't happen overnight. It happened over a period of time, right? Rampant poaching, killing, loss of habitat, all those things. It happened over time, and I wanted to capture that. Lastly, for those who like Cobbett and Kenneth Anderson, it serves two purposes. One is none of them, okay, Cobbett left immediately after independence because he didn't want to stay back. But Kenneth Anderson stayed back all the way till 74 when he passed away, but we don't know anything of what his life was like. But Donald Anderson actually, straddled two parts of India, both British India and I wouldn't say modern India, but all the way to 2014. So
right.
How his life really transformed is what this book is about.
So this is 1930 to about 2014.
34 to 2014.
Right. Wow. Imagine, it's a historian having lived out there. I love the detailing that you gave of a time gone by, from cars that ran on kerosene to those bicycles which had, I think, oil in some portion of it. There was parts of how fish was bought and meat from certain parts, Johnson Market being one. And I just felt that you really indulged over there. You actually felt that you must write it to make it part of almost Bangalore history.
Right.
And I think I looked at it as a combination of both the history coming out in the form of a story. How much time did you spend with Don? Was it over one session which lasted for some 2-3 hours, or was it multiple sessions? Did all this come out specifically, or over conversation all this came out?
So there are various parts to that. So like all of us here, we have day jobs, and I really couldn't afford to be sitting with Donald Anderson and putting it all together. So a lot of this is when I spend time with Donald, but also if you spend time with Donald, you realize that those conversations never really go they want to. Right? You come with a certain approach saying, today you need to talk about this topic and this and that, but it would just go on something else. So I can't say use. I paid kids from Christ College to go sit with a dictaphone with Don. Right? I would give them the questions. They would sit with Don, read out the questions. He would give them the answers. They'd send them back to me. And all the while, like I said, it was a left brain exercise. I was putting stories and different things and just pulling it all together. So there was part where I was involved, part with the students, and then his friends and family also contributed.
Sure. There was also the sting operation on him, no? Multiple times where you had a friend putting a record player in his pocket.
Correct.
And
those were the days
and making Don talk and use words like bugger and
those were the days before he got very friendly with us.
Right.
He wasn't very open to talking to strangers. So, but we had this thing of trying to find answers. Friends like who all grew up reading Kenneth Anderson's book, we wanted so many answers which we didn't find. Right. So
just give a sense of what Kenneth Anderson was all about. I mean, how big was Kenneth Anderson?
He was known as the Cobbett of South India.
This is Don's father.
Don's father. He was a Scot, born in 1910 and passed away in 74. And they come from a long line of Scottish people who emigrated to India as part of the British East India Company. They all came from Glasgow. They settled in Calcutta, which has a lot of similarity with your book, including the surname.
The Anderson, yeah.
The Anderson,
Yeah.
correct.
Alice Anderson.
Who would have thought? So they came with the British East India Company. They were goldsmiths initially,
Okay.
and they gradually migrated southwards. From Calcutta, they moved to Bolaram, which is in Hyderabad, and then to Bangalore. And the entire bloodline is no longer there today, right? Don was the last male.
Oh
from that.
gosh,
Yeah.
my. Okay.
So,
Right. Don says that, you know what, the joy of sitting in an Indian jungle is an indescribable feeling. He said this. Not the words of a bloodthirsty hunter.
true. So Don's love for the outdoors is, I think, hunting was actually a byproduct and factor of many influences. But Don's primary love, I think, for a lot of us is actually being out in the outdoors, right? Being away from the city, away from people, being one with nature, enjoying wild animals. That's what it was all about. In fact, like his father, although he did shoot even in his later days, but sometimes he would just go away just alone without even a gun. And the words you picked up were what he says: when I sit at a waterhole on a moonlit night and I don't have a gun because I'm supremely confident I know how animals behave. But just to sit there, and obviously you and I wouldn't do it, Tony, but those were the days when people did things like this and they enjoyed it terribly.
Okay. I want to just go back a bit more on what would life have been for Don, those formative years for Don. If you can just give me a sense of that, the place where he lived, or his recreational moments, or a bit more about Don as a person.
Sure. I'll try to generalize it as what would life have been for, let's say, a Britisher in
Bangalore.
In Bangalore in those days. So this is the 1930s and 40s, and not too many things have been written. So I thought these little tidbits could be interesting for people today. So there were no concept of fridges, there were no fans those days,
Right.
Definitely no ACs and things like that. Yet you had ice cream available. You could make it at home.
Okay.
There's something called an ice cream maker with rock salt. You add that. You walked to school because you lived inevitably very close to school. And if you were Don Anderson, you rode a pony to school.
All right. That's interesting. And this is Bishop Cotton's.
He studied at Bishop Cotton Boys School.
Right.
And the exam system was very different back then.
Right. So you rode a pony to school.
Sorry?
You rode a pony to school.
You rode a pony to school if you had to move for some reason and your family moved 8-10 kilometers away, you walked to school.
This is when his house shifted from
Correct.
Near Bishop Cotton to some place near
Beyond-
Sajapur Road somewhere.
Correct. Beyond Koramangala. And I think it was expected. There was no mollycoddling of any sort. So if you moved 8 kilometers away and you didn't have a pony, you walked. So you walked 8 kilometers and 16 kilometers you walked every day.
Right.
I was telling you what Bangalore was like. So there were no fridges. I think the closest contraption would be a meat safe, right? Which is a grilled wooden box where you kept everything. But Bangalore was cold those days and you really didn't need fridges. What else?
Fish. How was fish bought?
Yeah, there was no concept of plastic those days. You went to fish market and came back wrapped in newspaper. A lot of things were brought home, like milk was brought home, eggs, bread, they were all brought home. The barber visited you home. And there was one day where everybody got their hair cut.
Right.
The tailor, he would come and he would spend a day with you and everything that you be stitched was stitched on that day. So
I think this lasted all the way till the late 80s. Still things changed and India became a little more prosperous for that matter. You're right. All that is captured very beautifully in his book. All these little nuances, which I guess our parents might have told us, but this was so detailed and we can't believe that this is how Bangalore lived really. And that was brought up very, very well. And the fact that Don kind of moved from a bigger house to a smaller house and the walk that he had to go through, etc., which perhaps created the person that he is. I think the foreword by TNS Perumal, I guess he's the pioneer in wildlife photography in India. He mentions that he knew Don, and he says that Don and I were very similar. We were naturalists.
That's what he says.
Naturalists. And the only difference was that I picked up a camera while he picked up a gun.
Right.
And I thought the similarity was very compelling. Why don't you just tell me about
They
that?
were contemporaries, of course,
Okay.
practically the same age. In fact, DNA Perumal, like a lot of others, started their forays into the jungles with hunting. So
Okay.
he shot a leopard as well, which is close to Bannerghatta. But his bloodlust kind of ended there, and he said, I can't do this, but I still need to go back to the jungles to enjoy that. So he picked up photography. Uh, the comparison that he says is whether you're a photographer or a hunter, you have to be absolutely in sync with the surroundings, right?
Okay.
You're going to capture something either with a bullet or with a camera, but you need to understand how the surroundings work, what times of the day, would you make sense for you. You need to know the animal's behavior. You need to know how it behaves under certain circumstances. So he says, till the last minute, where you pull different triggers, either the shutter of the camera or the gun, your behavior is practically the same, and they have great respect for each other.
I want to delve into colonial life in the 30s and 40s. There are a couple of mentions of St. Andrew's Church. There is a mention of the South Parade church over there. There's one more which is mentioned of that. How did that come about? How was that part of the whole ecosystem? Number one. And number two, Don mentions about the chokras who were there with him in those formative years, etc. So, what was colonial life like for a typical
Bangalore.
Bangalorean?
So the cantonment area ended at the end of MG Road.
That would be
the Anil Kumble Circle and so on.
right.
So it ended there.
That's where it ended.
Correct. So beyond that was the Peta, or which is the Karnataka part of it. So
Okay.
the cantonment area ended there. So if you were part of the cantonment area, like we were discussing, right? So
Okay.
that was life back then. You traveled either by foot or by a Victoria, which is actually a horse carriage. If you're more affluent, you moved on to bicycles, cars, and so on. What are the other questions? Sorry.
So what was obviously a Britisher had certain perks which was over and beyond a normal person.
Correct.
What are those perks that were there?
Let's just take the example of his house. So they lived in a mansion on what is Kasturba Road today.
Yeah, just tell us where exactly did he stay and what has become of that house.
Right. So those who are familiar with Bangalore and Kasturba Road, you still have the police station and a petrol pump. So adjacent to that, there is a building called Prestige Obelisk.
Right.
That entire area belonged to the Anderson family, and it extended into Cubbon Park. So acres on that road, right, is what the family had. And with this kind of a property and this huge house that you had so many servants. You had a servant for a gardener. You had a chokras, I mentioned, who did the little odd jobs. You had an ayah. So all perks of being somebody from the cantonment area in those days.
Right. I want to mention the ayah bit. An ayah was someone, I mean, since I grew up in Calcutta, if you had somebody who worked domestically, we would call the person ayah. And ayah were an important part of everyone's life. In fact, when I read The Last White Hunter, the ayah forms a very important part in his life also, where the ayah accompanies him to his school. He gets special permission to sit with him because he was, I don't know, he has his own fears of classroom. The ayah would be his biggest supporter when his parents would get really angry with him. And there's a scene where he's running and his mother is after him with a chappal, and the ayah is right behind saying, stop, he's innocent, and things like that. And how she supported him from June, when June is a sister, I guess. When June was getting all the support, it was Ayah who was a spokesperson. So tell me about the Ayah, and how do these individuals spend their entire life with a household?
Right. Like I said, you had a lot of servants when you were part of colonial Bangalore. So I don't think the parents were really involved in the children's lives as much as we see today. So they did their own thing. The children were brought up by the ayahs and so on. So all these things had a big influence on Don's life. So whether it is superstitions or stories or ghost stories that the ayah told him, or somebody else from that, all those made a big influence in his life as he was growing up.
Right. So the Prospect Houses, Prestige, What about the Divishi Chambers? I believe that was a
So
lake at one time.
it's an IT building today, the Divishi Chambers. But what used to exist in its place was a large pond, what you call tank. It was called mud tank back then. In the 30s and 40s, Don used to go fishing there. So you can't imagine.
I just can't. So the hockey stadium,
all that
all
area was a lake, pond.
A pond.
Yeah.
And that's become the hockey stadium and the Divishi Chambers,
Correct.
etc. One cannot believe that something like that happened. Don studied in Bishop Cotton, one of the premium schools here, and I thought that part also was pretty colorful. You want to just talk about what life was in Bishop Cotton's,
Sure.
from the canteen to the teachers to everything else?
Right. Very disciplinarian school in those days, all run by priests, by English Anglo-Indian priests, and you had to be good in sports. It was very as good as anything else. You had to learn boxing. Everybody had to learn boxing.
Okay.
Sports was almost mandatory, and I'll tell you an incident. So, in the rainy season, if it rained in Bangalore and you couldn't do your regulars, we couldn't play cricket and all, the entire class had to run from Bishop Cotton Boys School all the way to Grants Road and then back. So you would have the scene of 20-30 boys running in the rain all the way there and back. So that was it. So there's no question of there was raining and you can't do sports. You still had to do that every day. It didn't have so many buildings back then. Buildings came later on Bishop Cotton. But apart from sport, there were also these unorganized little games happening in different parts. So there would be quail fighting, right? Boys would bring quails from their homes and they would have matches against each other. Spinning tops, kites, all those things were part of Bishop Cotton Boys back then.
Can we wind down and maybe take some audience questions at this point?
Sure. And I'll probably, I want to ask one question before that.
Sure,
I do that.
absolutely.
I just want to understand this character. Was Don a white hunter or a native hunter? Just give me that and I'll take the audience questions after that.
Okay. So by white hunter, I suppose you mean how they behaved when they were out.
Precisely. Was this?
So Don was anything but. He was as hardworking and his jungle craft was as good as any of the tracker guys that he would. So he would be able to see footprints, to tell you the story of what it was. He would know where would the animal be, all those things. So he did as much of the hard work as a shikari guide as any them themselves.
He was a hardworking hunter. He didn't just stand out there and do his bit. Audience, if you have any questions, please.
If the audience has any questions, we'd be happy to come here and ask them. Please come on over.
We have a lot of questions about the immigrant culture in general. Now, how did he, as the English diaspora in India, how did that change him and influence his life?
That's a great question, actually. Thank you.
So, could you just the fact that he was a British, is that what the question was?
The fact that he was a British
Right.
immigrant
Almost,
in
why did he
India.
stay back and how did that even?
So how did that shape his life and his identity as a British Indian?
Right. So I think to a great degree, it kind of waned over the years. I think he enjoyed a lot of privileges before 1947. After independence, as the British presence in India kind of gradually waned out, I think he started to accept himself more as an Indian than ever. So at any point, maybe see, even immediately after 1947, those special privileges he enjoyed were all gone. And he was happy to be an Indian just like anybody else. In fact, there's this, I mentioned this, his father on the eve of independence walked out on the MG Road to find out what was happening. And they asked him, are you happy? He said, this. And he was garlanded and is carried on the shoulders of MG Road.
And he stuck around. He remained in India when everybody else
India
went.
was very much a home for the family.
I'll wrap this up to tell you something about this book. It's now translated into both Malayalam and Kannada, which speaks volumes of the art that you've created with The Last White Hunter. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you for the questions also.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joshua.